While the Orioles are much more talent heavy in the major leagues than they had been in years past, there's still a large focus on that development that goes on in the minors. And a lot of that is those minor league coaches. The Orioles announced their new group of those people in 2025, and we're going to run through some of the new names and interesting promotions coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, January 27th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to run through the new names and previous names in the Orioles minor league coaching ranks, as the O's last week announced all of their minor league coaches for the 2025 season. We're going to go through some of the interesting names who were promoted and what they bring to this organization and talk about the new names. That's always interesting. Who are the new faces the Orioles are bringing into this org to help continue to develop guys and get them to the majors? And then a couple of other news and notes relating to the Orioles coming up at the end of the show as well. But that is all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So this is always a fun episode for me. Some of these names you maybe don't even get to know very well. They switch organizations. They never quite make it to the big leagues with the Orioles. But these are the people that we're going to talk about today that really kind of make things happen in the minor leagues. Now, we know the O's no longer have the number one farm system in baseball, and a lot of that is because they were so top-heavy in talent, and a lot of those guys have graduated and are big parts of a really good major league team for the O's. There are still, according to, MLB Pipeline put out their list last week, they still have Samuel Basallo and Kobe Mayo in the top 15, still some highly ranked prospects, but the Orioles only had 3 top 100 guys. Gone are the days of the 6 and 7 and 8 players in the top 100 because the system was so stacked at the upper level. This system looks different. It's still hitter heavy, but there is a lot of more intriguing pitcher talent in this system than there has ever been. And there are still some great coaches helping with the development of getting these guys to the bigs. And with the Orioles announcing their 2025 minor league coaching staffs late last week, I do an episode every year when the Orioles make this announcement, just kind of breaking down every name you need to know for most of these staffs. And so just wanted to go through them today because it's some interesting people who kind of mold the next generation of Baltimore Orioles. So let's start from the top down. The AAA Norfolk Tides announcing their staff, and we're kind of going to do these in 4 categories for each team and level. We'll talk about the new faces. These are people who had never worked in the organization until this year. We'll talk about the promotions, people who were given a little bump in status or level or whatever it may be. We'll talk about who's sticking around in the same role as last year, and then not back. Who is not back? There are some coaches who were with the Orioles last year and previously who are not back with the organization. But we'll begin with AAA Norfolk, and the one new face at Harbor Park will be their new manager. That is former Major League catcher Tim Federowicz, who caught 8 MLB seasons for 6 MLB teams from 2011 through 2019. His connections to the Orioles, well, he played for the Mike Elias Astros in 2018 and played for the 2016 Cubs briefly when Brandon Hyde was a base coach there as well. But this is a signing and a hiring we already talked about when it came out. The news broke earlier this offseason. Of course, Buck Britton is not back. He has been promoted to the Major League coaching staff with the Orioles. That AAA manager job, which he held for the last 3 years, was open, and Federowicz filled it. We talked about his background a few weeks ago on an episode, but he was the Tigers AAA manager last year. He was on their big league coaching staff in 2023, and he was the Mariners AAA manager in 2022. So certainly has a lot of experience in this role and will take over Norfolk in 2025. 2 promotions on this coaching staff. One is Felipe Alou Jr., who is entering his 18th season as a coach in the Orioles organization. He has been a staple for the O's. He is promoted to third base coach and fundamentals coach for the Norfolk Tides this year. He had been the manager in both Delmarva and Aberdeen for the past 3 seasons. Before that, worked at the FCL and the Dominican Summer League, was a big part of the Orioles rookie ball in their system. He has been a huge name and cool to see him get the promotion all the way up to AAA for the first time. And then Billy Facto will be the development coach in AAA. He's been in the organization since 2021, started as a technology intern. He was a development coach in AA Bowie last year and now gets the bump up to AAA. Two guys sticking around in their same role. That is pitching coach Justin Ramsey, who has been in this organization since Mike Elias took over in 2019. I mean, he is a guy you continuously hear about from Orioles pitchers, making the biggest impact on them in the minor league system. I thought there was a chance that Ramsey either last year or this year could get promoted to the big league staff. Orioles keep him in AAA. There's obviously going to be some big time arms down there this year. He'll be working with Cade Povich and Chase McDermott and Brandon Young, trying to get them all to the major leagues this season. Ramsey is kind of an extension of the big league staff at this point. He is a huge part of what the Orioles do pitching development-wise in the minors, and he remains in that high-ranking role. And then Mike Montville, who was hired last year, former University of Maryland player, as the hitting coach in AAA, will remain in that role with the Tides for his second season with the org. Three members of this organization are not back. I mentioned Buck Britton getting promoted. Ramon Sambo is now the development coach in the FCL. He was previously the development coach up in AAA Norfolk. And then the only one gone from the organization is Joshua Rodriguez. He was the development coach for the Tides last year. Currently looks like does not have another coaching job at the moment, but is no longer in the org. We go down to AA, where the biggest change for the Bay Sox, besides a couple of staff adjustments, is their new name. No longer known as the Bowie Bay Sox, they are now the Chesapeake Bay Sox. This was something announced, I feel like a month or more ago. I hadn't really talked about it on the podcast yet, but yes, they are going with a different branding to try and encapsulate a larger area of Maryland, basically. And now the Chesapeake Bay Sox, still playing in the same stadium, but with a new name and a new logo as well. They changing it for 2025. Now, they don't have any new faces on this staff, meaning no one came from outside the organization hired to the Bay Sox, but there is two promotions. Jordy Henry will be their pitching coach this year, was promoted where he was the Ironbirds pitching coach last year. This is now his third season in the Orioles organization. And Calvin Christensen, who was the development coach in Delmarva last year, will now be the development coach in Aberdeen, also his third season in the org. But AA really has the biggest group of guys just staying put. Roberto Mercado, his fourth season in the org, will remain as the AA manager for Chesapeake, his second year as a manager at the AA level after the Orioles hired him from being a high school coach in Connecticut. Players love this guy, Mercado. He is a big part of what the Orioles do in this org, and he managed in the Arizona Fall League this year for the Orioles as well. Josh Bunselmeyer will remain as the hitting coach, his second year at AA with the O's and his fifth season in the organization. And Chase Sebi, who is in his fourth season in the org, second in AA as the fundamentals coach for the Bay Sox once again. The only guy not back is Austin Miney, who was actually hired away to get a promotion. Congratulations to Austin. Hired as the minor league pitching coordinator for the St. Louis Cardinals this offseason. And we, of course, wish him well in St. Louis. Moving it on to High A Aberdeen, the Ironbirds do have two new faces in this organization. One of them really, really interesting. Jeremy Hileman has been hired as the Ironbirds pitching coach, and it's been an interesting run for him in his coaching ranks. Most previously was the pitching coach at Division I St. Joe's in Philadelphia during the 2024 season, and really turned that pitching staff around. He lowered their ERA by about a run from 2023 to 24. His team led the Atlantic 10 St. Joe's Conference in strikeouts and strikeouts per nine. St. Joe's, not the greatest baseball program in the world. And you think about all the teams in the SEC and the ACC and the Pac, formerly the Pac-12, I guess, the Big 12, that just dominate college baseball. And with all of those teams, St. Joe's pitching staff ranked 29th nationally in strikeouts per nine last season. That is very impressive by Hileman. All three of his weekend starters last year finished with more strikeouts than innings pitched. That's always a good sign. And they were all top six in the A-10 conference in strikeouts. He got two of his pitchers drafted in 2024, not something that usually happens at St. Joe's. That is a heck of a job at a lesser-known cold weather baseball program for Jeremy Hileman. And the Orioles really rewarded him with a job. Came over from Army West Point, where he was the pitching coach at the D1 level in 2023. All four of the starters that Army used that year finished in the top 8 in the Patriot League in strikeouts. He's going to make pitchers learn how to miss bats. That is what he's done his entire career. was a pitching coach at Canisius at the D1 level in 2022, coached the Metro Atlantic Conference strikeout leader that season. I think you're sensing a pattern. He coached as a pitching coach at D2 Shippensburg in 2021, was the director of pitching at a private facility, Full Reps Training Center in Pennsylvania from 2017 to 2021. And he played college baseball, pitched in college at 3 schools, Mount St. Mary's from around here in 2015, Harford Community College here in Maryland from where I'm from in 2016, and then Kutztown in Pennsylvania in 2017. Got some Maryland ties, got a really successful baseball pitching coach background. This, I think, is the most exciting outside of the org hire that the Orioles have made this offseason. And the other new face in Aberdeen is Adonis Smith, who was hired to be the development coach for the Ironbirds. He was the hitting coach for the Trenton Thunder of the MLB Draft League in 2023. They were previously the AA affiliate of the Yankees, lost affiliation, joined the MLB Draft League, and then he was actually the manager of the Trenton Thunder in the 2024 season, so a pretty big coaching role. He also had the hitting coach job for the Williamsport Crosscutters, also in the MLB Draft League in 2022. But before that, you really can't find a lot about his coaching career. He played college baseball at NC State and North Carolina A&T, graduated in 1999 with an engineering degree, and then basically up until last September had been working full-time, at least according to his LinkedIn page, as an engineer at a couple different companies in some capacity. Did play a couple of years in indie ball in the early 2000s, but otherwise was mostly an engineer, and then just seemingly last year decided when he was the manager in Trenton to fully focus on coaching, and the Orioles reward him with a job in their system. So I'm really interested to see what Adonis Smith can do with the Orioles. In terms of promotions to Aberdeen, there are 2 of them. Ryan Gohl will be the manager for the Ironbirds, his first managerial job in the minor leagues. He's been in the Orioles organization as a coach since 2020 and was the development coach for the Ironbirds last year and gets promoted to that managerial role. Really, really cool for Ryan Gohl in that job to get that promotion. You just kind of think about that everything he's done, the different jobs that he has had in this Orioles system. Definitely pretty cool to see him end up with a managerial job, and we'll be interested to see how that does eventually play out. Of course, Aberdeen's manager last year was Felipe Rojas-Alou Jr., who is now up at AAA. And then Daniel Fajardo will be the fundamentals coach for the Ironbirds. He's been a coach in the Orioles system since 2021, was promoted after having the same role in Delmarva last year, but has been in the O's org forever. He was picked up by the Orioles, was a catcher in their system from 2012 through 2019, never made the major leagues, but has been around Baltimore for a long time, and they hired him as a coach pretty much immediately when he said his playing career was done, and he has really helped out this system as well. The one guy who's sticking around in the same role is hitting coach Zach Cole. He's been in the org since 2021, and basically the whole time this has been his job. It'll be his 4th season as the Ironbirds hitting coach. The only coach not back is Charles Bolden. He was the fundamentals coach last year. He has been hired as the recruiting coordinator at Georgetown down in D.C. We wish him the best in his new role there. But also got to talk about the Delmarva Shorebirds. Also got to talk about the rookie ball levels as well. We'll get to those teams coming up right after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by GameTime. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. You can connect with other fans. You make memories for a lifetime. Now, I've never been to an NFL playoff game, but I've been to regular season games, and those have been just tremendous. I can't imagine what a playoff game looks like. Well, GameTime now has a new feature called GameTime Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And you can maybe look at Super Bowl tickets at GameTime. Might be a little out of your price range, but even so, you can still check out NBA, NHL, college sports tickets, all through GameTime Picks on the app and on the website. Browsing through the deals is simple. You can find great value for all kinds of seats as well. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So we continue on talking about the Orioles 2025 minor league coaching staffs, and we move to the low A Delmarva Shorebirds. They do have one new face in the organization joining Delmarva. That is Luis Silverio, who has been hired as the fundamentals coach for Delmarva. He has been a coach in the Diamondbacks organization since 2019. Most recently was the bench coach for the ACL D-backs at the rookie ball level in Arizona in 2024. Spent a few years as a field coordinator as well, has done some different jobs there. And he played in the Diamondbacks system, was an outfielder there from 2015 to 2018, 33rd round pick by the D-backs in 2015 out of Eastern Florida State College. Did never get past high A as a player in their system, but said he was done playing, was immediately hired as a coach, and has really been with Arizona for a long time. So some new faces, a new place for Silverio, but interesting to see how he will help out the Shorebirds this year. Two promotions on this Shorebirds staff. Casey Buckley is now the Delmarva development coach. It is his third season in the organization. He was a staff assistant and bullpen catcher last year, so a cool promotion for him. Orioles hired him as a coach right after graduating as a player from Michigan in 2023. And then Casey Day has been promoted to pitching coach. This is his second season in the organization. He was a development coach in the FCL for the Orioles last season. Then you've got two people who are sticking around in their same roles. Colin Woody is back as the Shorebirds manager. Second season in that role, but he's been in the O system as a coach for a while, since 2019. He also played in the Orioles system, was a 38th round pick by the Orioles out of UNC Greensboro as an infielder in 2016, played 3 years in the system, was done with his playing days. O's immediately hired him as a coach, and he's now moved up to manager status for the second straight year with the Shorebirds. And then Christian Polson will continue as a second year as a hitting coach for Delmarva and his fourth overall season in the organization. Only guy that is not back is Andy Sadowski, who was the pitching coach here last year. He has been hired by the Boston Red Sox to be the pitching coach for the Greenville Drive in their system. So congrats to Andy on that hiring. You would think maybe having something to do with Chris Holt also being hired by the Red Sox after being let go by the Orioles, who is now the bullpen coach for Boston as well. Now, we do have some other levels here. We have the FCL and the Dominican Summer League, Florida Complex League, Dominican Summer League. Those are anywhere from 2 to 4 teams, all rookie ball levels, recent international signings, very recent draft picks, really young players. There's multiple teams at each of these levels, which means a lot of coaches to go through. I'll name drop some of them here, like just going through the Orioles announcement here at those levels. Christian Frias is back managing the FCL Orioles. That's his fourth season there. Adam Blade back as the pitching coach. Tegan Leader is the hitting coach. You've got a couple of guys like Jake Ratz joining the staff from the DSL. You've got some promotions. You look at some other guys, Elvis Morel and Chris Madera are back as DSL Orioles managers. They've been in those roles for a couple of years. Some of the same names who are down at those levels as well, certainly helping out with the youngest version of Orioles prospects, but did want to mention 4 new faces at the rookie ball level for the O's. The first one is Quentin Holmes, who the Orioles have hired to be an FCL development coach this year, was a former top-ish prospect, Guardian's second round pick out of high school in 2017. He was an outfielder who did make it up to AA in 2022, but never really panned out beyond that, and then was released. Played indie ball in 2023, but then was done playing, was hired by the Mahoning Valley Scrappers in the MLB Draft League to be their base running and outfield coach in 2024. Orioles obviously like what they heard and saw from him in that role and has hired him as development coach in 2025. Cade Johnson was hired as the FCL pitching development coach this season. Really interesting hire here. He has been an education coordinator and throwing trainer at Driveline for the past 4 seasons, something you like to see. He was actually a club baseball player at Purdue, was never on the D1 team. 2020 graduate, was on the club team, but in his final year there, he was a data analyst for the Division I team, so did work with them, but never played for them, but then went to work at Driveline, and seemingly, when you're a staff member at Driveline, you also get to work out at the facilities because a lot of those trainers are also still trying to make it as professional players or are currently professional players. And apparently Cade Johnson worked out enough to, even though he was just a club player at Purdue, to get a professional contract. And he pitched in Indie Ball in the Pioneer League for the Great Falls Voyagers in 2023 and was even looking for a pro chance in 2024. Unfortunately, didn't get it, continued to work at Driveline, but really cool background there. And he comes in as a pitching development coach for the Orioles. And I kind of like that hire because it's like, hey, if he taught himself how to be a pro pitcher after not even pitching in college beyond the club level, then I think he can help out with some Orioles pitchers in the FCL as well. John Nowak is a new Dominican Summer League pitching coach for the Orioles. He was a pitching coach in the NECBL last summer. That is a collegiate wood bat league for college players. Was a high school coach in 2023, but also worked as an intern at Cressy Sports Performance to work with pitchers. It's not Driveline, but it's one of those Driveline-like places that works with a lot of professional pitchers. But interestingly enough, he was not a pitcher in college. He was actually a 5-year catcher in college at the Division III level, 4 years at Bates College, then 1 graduate year at D3 Power Babson. But catchers do work with pitchers, and you see that a lot. A lot of pitching coaches are either pitchers or were actually catchers in their playing days. We see that from John Nowak, and he joins the organization. And the last new face at the rookie ball level is Jake Welch, joins this team as a hitting coach at the Dominican Summer League. There seems to be a Jake Welch baseball coach who was a volunteer assistant at Davidson College in 2022, was previously the head coach at Frank Phillips College, a community college in Texas, and played Division I baseball at Bethune-Cookman. I couldn't find if that is the same person. I'm assuming it is at this point, but the Orioles did hire Jake Welch to be their hitting coach in the Dominican Summer League. But that's a look at the coaches. A lot of people moving around, new faces in new places. Anthony Villa did an article where he talked with John Mioli of the Baltimore Banner late last week and talked about how basically about 50% of the coaches are in the same spot, 50% are moving around or new hires, and he likes that half and half to get some same faces, but some new faces, new voices to keep the development rolling at the minor league system. And definitely some interesting people. I've had some minor league coaches on in the past. We'll try to have some of these people on the podcast here in 2025. If any of them are listening or watching right now, reach out, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. Love to have you on the show. And we will continue to keep you updated on, hey, if they have any more movement or they do any good work, which I know they'll do working with some players in the Orioles system. But a couple more things in Birdland to get to before we finish things up, and we will get to them right after this break. So that'll be about it for Orioles in terms of the coaching staffs, but there are certainly some other news to get to. And I would say really the biggest roster move one here is Roansy Contreras. Now, we've talked about Roansy Contreras a little bit so far this offseason. He was claimed off waivers by the Orioles a couple weeks ago. Right-handed pitcher, former top prospect with the Yankees, was dealt to the Pirates in the Jamison Tyone deal. Got to the big leagues with the Pirates a couple years ago, looked awesome as a starter in his rookie season. Then it kind of all fell apart. They moved into the bullpen, still wasn't great there. Ended up DFAing him last year. Caught on with the Angels as a reliever, but a not very good one. And then the Angels put him on waivers this offseason, bounced around a few teams, but still has stuff, still has youth. Teams think they can do something with Contreras. The Orioles claimed him, but as I talked about when they made the move, they have a full 40-man roster. This is probably going to be a move where they claim Contreras, and then a couple of days later, they DFA him to basically try and pass him through waivers in kind of the roster crunch situation, because he has never passed through waivers before in his career, and unfortunately, he is at this point out of options, which is why he keeps getting DFA'd, or at least one of the reasons he does, and the big reason he was by the Pirates during the 2024 season. But I talked about how he still has so much promise at age 24 that teams are going to claim him. And the Orioles are basically trying to claim him and then waive him again if no one claims him. And if the Orioles get him, they're pretty far down the waiver order because it goes in reverse order of record from last year. They're pretty far down already. They're thinking, hey, 23, 24 teams have already said no on him. If we claim it and then we waive him, only like 5 or 6 more teams have to say no. And then we get to keep him in AAA, but not have him take up a 40-man roster spot. And then we can really work with him at AAA next year to turn him back into the pitcher we know he can be. So the Orioles did that. Unfortunately, even though they were playing the odds, one of those 5 or 6 teams below them in the waiver wire wanted Contreras. And unfortunately, it was the Yankees who did claim Roansy Contreras off waivers from the Orioles. Now, there's a pretty good chance the Yankees try and do the same thing with Contreras at some point later this offseason, where they DFA him and try to pass him through waivers. And if the Orioles have a spot on the 40-man, I wouldn't be surprised if they claim him right back. He's going to be bouncing back and forth there, so that'll be something interesting to watch. The Orioles were able to do the same thing with Livan Soto earlier this offseason, where they DFA'd him wanting to keep him in the org. He passed through waivers. They were able to outright him to AAA. Soto, who they like as a depth guy in the infield, who got some big league time with the O's last year, stays in the organization, but is no longer taking up a 40-man roster spot. And Jacob Amaya, the infielder who the Orioles claimed from the White Sox last week, my thought would be the Orioles, the next time they make a move, it's going to be the same thing. They are going to DFA Jacob Amaya after 3 weeks with the organization or whatever it is, hoping that he does pass through those final 6 or 7 teams and then gets to stay with the O's in AAA so they can work with him, but doesn't take up a 40-man roster spot. And then the last piece of news was just, kind of sad news from the Orioles media world, as Steve Melewski, who has been covering the Orioles on MASN since, I think you wrote about it in his article late 2007. We're talking about here 17 plus years. He's been covering the Orioles at MASN. Unfortunately, MASN let him go this week. I believe sometime this upcoming week will be his final day at MASN covering the Orioles. He wrote a story at MASN.com last week kind of announcing the news and how much he's enjoyed his time and how he still wants to cover the Orioles moving forward. And he's not really considering at this point taking a job covering another team. Like, he wants to cover the O's. Steve is someone who I've never had on this podcast, had a lot of people on this show in the now 5+ years I've been hosting it that cover the Orioles. Steve is someone I've never had on, but have always had great respect for him. I've known a lot of people who have worked with him at MASN and have had some great things to say about Steve, not even his work, really more about just his interaction and relationships with the people he works with and the people around him. Did some good writing, did some better reporting than you'll see from other writers at MASN who do similar things, cover the minor leagues, which was nice to see, as the Orioles were certainly going through the rebuild as well. And Steve is someone who is, if he's still looking to work in covering the Orioles, is looking for another role, looking to start his own thing, whatever it may be. I'm hoping to have Steve on this show at some point during the 2025 season if he is still covering the Orioles and it's something he does want to do. Multitude of reasons I won't get into why I've never really reached out to have him on in the past, and has nothing to do with Steve as a person or his work, just some of the people around him over there at MASN. But really like Steve, really unfortunate that MASN is moving this direction. And the way I see it, this may not be the first, or I should say, may not be the last thing that happens in terms of cutbacks happening at MASN. I hope that's not the case, but it's just unfortunate that they've let go of Steve Melewski. A lot of people enjoyed his work, and certainly, he's someone who randomly, and when I was playing high school baseball in Northern Maryland, our team beat our rival on a walk-off walk in extra innings, and you were celebrating on the field. And I go on Twitter after the game, and I see Steve Melewski had tweeted a photo of our walk-off and was talking about how he was at the game and it was a great game. And I'm like, I don't think Steve went to our high school. Like, Steve didn't have a kid on either team. Steve just loved baseball so much that it seemed like he was just at the Falston Bel Air game back in 20, whatever it would have been, 14, 15, whatever it would have been, watching us win on a walk-off. And I was like, an Orioles reporter was tweeting about our game. It was pretty cool. And he just seemingly loves the sport of baseball. And I hope that Steve can definitely catch on somewhere, and maybe a little bit here, Locked on Orioles, if you'd like to come on the show, but to continue covering the Baltimore Orioles. You always hate to see anybody in media covering the O's, whatever it may be, losing their position. And we certainly wish Steve the best moving forward. But that'll do it for today's episode. If you enjoy what you hear on this show, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked on Orioles YouTube channel. Make sure to also subscribe wherever you listen, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever, and leave a 5-star rating and a review there on the show. That really, really helps out the pod. We will be back, unless, of course, there is any big Orioles news. We'll be back on Wednesday. We got a few more players to do their 2024 season reviews. Next up is Cedric Mullins, heading into a contract year. His final season under contract with the Orioles is 2025. Feels like that went by fast. His role did diminish a little bit last year. So we'll take a look at the Orioles outfield, take a look at Mullins' season, and try to predict, okay, does he have an everyday role on this Orioles team this season? And will the O's bring him back beyond 2025? That's coming up on Wednesday's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked on Orioles podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, Your team every day.